Hello and welcome to my channel. We're still on the nervous system, and today's topic is the basal ganglia or basal nuclei. So let's begin. The basal ganglia are collections of gray matter inside the white matter of the brain, and they are involved in most of the four brain functions and connected to virtually all signals from the cortex. So it's a kind of a filtration system or association system for the impulses going to or from the brain. They consist of the lentiform nucleus, composed of the putamen and globus pallidus, the caudate nucleus, the subthalamic nucleus, the substantia nigra in the midbrain, the corpus striatum, which is the anterior ends of the caudate nucleus and the globus pallidus, and other sites in the brain like the nucleus accumbens, for example, the prerubral field of Forel. This is a field or an area above the red nucleus. So it's not only those, but these are the main basal ganglia inside the brain. This is a picture showing the site of the basal ganglia. This is the caudate nucleus. See, it has a head and a body in the lateral ventricle, superior horn, and the tail in the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle that ends in the amygdaloid nucleus. It was thought before that the amygdaloid nucleus is part of the basal ganglia, but it's not. It's rather connected to the basal ganglia. We have also the substantia nigra showing here. Here, this site for the subthalamic nucleus. So these are the lentiform nucleus, which is composed of two parts, the putamen and globus pallidus. The anterior end is called the corpus striatum. It's a connection between the caudate nucleus and the lentiform nucleus. So all these are the basal ganglia in the brainstem, in the brain, I mean. Most of the functions are motor functions. They filter the motor functions for the motor activity to be more smooth and precise. The caudate nucleus, this is the caudate nucleus. See how it's connected to the lentiform nucleus at the anterior end, or the head. In this horizontal section of the brain, we can see the head of the caudate nucleus. This is the head projecting into the lateral ventricle. It has a head and a body and a tail that extends into the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. Of course, we need a lower level than this horizontal section to see the tail of the caudate nucleus ending in the amygdaloid nucleus. The lentiform nucleus, it's shaped like a wedge cut from a sphere, and it's lateral to the thalamus. This is the thalamus and the caudate nucleus. See how it's partially connected to at the anterior end with the caudate nucleus, and see the two distinct, different in color, demarcating the two parts of the lentiform nucleus. This is the putamen, and this pale part is called the globus pallidus. Of course, this white matter between it and the caudate anteriorly and between it and the thalamus posteriorly is the internal capsule. Okay? This is a coronal section showing the caudate nucleus and the lentiform nucleus connected anteriorly with the caudate nucleus. This is the corpus callosum, of course, and this is the lateral ventricle, and this is the septum pellucidum, and the septum pellucidum separating the two lateral ventricles. The subthalamic nucleus, from its name, it's beneath the thalamus, so it's in this area, occupying the upper part of the midbrain, right, next to the substantia nigra of the midbrain and above the red nucleus of the midbrain. This is the subthalamic nucleus. The substantia nigra, it's showing here in this section of the midbrain. These are the cerebral peduncles. The white matter in this stain stains black, and the gray matter stains white. So this is gray matter. This is the substantia nigra, and behind it you will find the red nucleus apparent in this section. Okay, this is the aqueduct of Sylvius with the periaqueductal gray, and this is the tectum of the midbrain. And in this section in particular, it shows the emergence of the oculomotor nerve. So this is the substantia nigra in the midbrain. It's called nigra because it's loaded with the melanin pigment. Functions of the basal ganglia. Basal ganglia project to the prefrontal cortex, which has motor functions, association motor functions, and also some other non-motor functions. It has behavioral and cognitive and emotions functions, and motor circuits project to and receive from the supplementary motor area. It's on the medial frontal gyrus we studied before on sections of the brain. Also to the premotor area in front of the primary motor area and the primary motor area, or motor area 4. Non-motor functions, prefrontal, mostly through the caudate nucleus. There is another circuit for the oculomotor function to control the saccadic movements of the eye. It's in the anterior to the primary motor area, in an area called area 8. It's on the middle frontal gyrus. Also there is a prefrontal circuit anterior to area 8, and it includes the Broca's areas for speech, areas 44 and 45. Also there is a limbic circuit connected to the limbic system, medial and inferior surface of the brain. Involves also the anterior part of the cingulate gyrus, the medial orbitofrontal cortex on the inferior surface of the brain, and it's concerned with motivation, means the intention of doing things. Disorders of basal ganglia. The symptoms involve tremors and other involuntary movements, like athetosis, means a small form of movement, or slow snaky-like form of movement. Chorea, it's like a dancing-like movements. Bellism, sudden violent movements, and dystonia, weak movements. Also involves slow movement without paralysis. It's not a paralysis. Involves changes in tone and posture of the body, and there is cognitive disturbance, means agnosia. The patient doesn't know the person he's talking to, and dementia. Emotional disturbance or affective disturbance. Patient doesn't react emotionally to anything. Also, one of the famous disorders of basal ganglia is Parkinsonism. It's of unknown etiology, involves unilateral tremors that becomes bilateral, involves also semi-flexed posture. Shuffling gait means the patient is rubbing his feet or dragging his feet on the ground, shuffling in a shuffling manner. There is a rigidity all over the body. That's why he assumes the semi-flexed posture, because of the tone or the rigidity of the flexor muscles of the spine. Also, there is neurodegeneration that progresses slowly. Bradykinesia, it's slow execution of movement, and akinesia, slow initiation of movement. That was a hint about the functions of the and disorders of the basal ganglia. Now for the cerebellum. The cerebellum is called the small brain and lies in the posterior cranial fossa, as we explained before, not the occipital lobe of the brain, but the cerebellum. It has two cerebellar hemispheres, and the middle part that connects them is called the vermis, which means worm-like. Composed mainly of three lobes and has three fissures. The primary fissure and horizontal fissure at the edge, and the flocculonodular fissure that separates the flocculonodular lobes. It's connected to the brainstem through three cerebellar peduncles, and has three layers in cut section. You can identify the layers of the cerebellum here. It's called the molecular layer and the nuclear layer and the Golgi cell layer, and it's evident in this middle layer the Purkinje cells that are the key cells around which the cerebellum acts. All other cells and tracts modify either increasing or stimulating or inhibiting the Purkinje cells. And by the way, these are the only cells that project to the outside of the cerebellum. This is another cut section of the cerebellum showing you the same principle of the basal ganglia. We have here collections of gray matter inside the white matter of the cerebellum. You can see the evident dentate nucleus. It's dentate in shape. The globose nucleus, the fastigious, the emboliform nucleus, the globose nucleus, and the fastigious nuclei. These are the four cerebellar nuclei on each side, and they are all connected in a way that controls a certain part of the movement of the body, important for the balance of the movements of the body. So dentate, emboliformis, globose, and fastigious, the most medial. Dentate being the most lateral and it's the biggest, fastigious the most medial. Dentate nucleus also has sensory functions, because in experiments, for example, in asking the patients to recognize the shape of objects while the objects being hidden using only their hands, they show activity in the dentate nucleus. It's unknown, but it's somehow connected to the sensory system. Functions of the cerebellum. In simple, there are three forms. You know, the most primitive is the vestibular cerebellum or the archicerebellum. The archi means the oldest cerebellum. It comprises the flocculonodular lobe, and it's present in the lower animals like fish, for example, that need balance to maintain the vertical position, not more than that. In more developed animals, lower animals that acquired limbs, for example, and need balance for movements executed by the spinal cord, they have developed another lobe of the cerebellum, or the spinocerebellum. It's called the paleocerebellum and is the vermis and the paravermis area of the cerebellum. In human beings, since they developed the cerebral hemispheres, which is more sophisticated than the lower animals, so the cerebellum enlarged and acquired an extra lobe or an extra zone. It's called the cerebrocerebellum. It's connected to the cerebral cortex. That's why it's called the neocerebellum, and it comprises the lateral zone of the cerebellum. I hope you got the maximum benefit from this lecture, and thank you very much for watching.